Next up in my updated Siege of Winterfell tier list will be that for Mono Cav. Mono Cav is actually becoming more and more popular, both as a PvP build generally, due to the prominence of Bleed Inf in recent months, but in Siege of Winterfell last season, and I would expect even more so this season, has become very, very popular. There are a few reasons for this. Firstly, of course, the whales, the quicker they can get back into fights, the better, and Cav lets them do that better. Infantry is a very prominent build type, and Cavalry, of course, counters that. But for the top players specifically, Cavalry is best due to Leila now having only Cavalry stats, and Senelle also, if people have her. And this is important because both of those will combine to exaggerate Daenerys' damage the most of any combination in this game mode. And exaggerating Daenerys' damage is the best way to kill stuff in this game mode. So Daenerys, despite not having Cav stats herself, naturally has a cavalry bias due to her enablers in Senelle and Leila. This isn't as prominent at the lower brackets of spending, but it's something to be aware of. All those top 20 alliances, I'd say, I would expect a lot of mono-cav players because of this, with those top players. And if you can flex around, maybe going mono-spear to potentially counter that in places could be a decent idea. Due to all those reasons, I mean, you don't even need to talk about it. You can just immediately put Daenerys, Leila, and Senelle straight into S tier. They're so good as a trio. They're so good as a trio even for off-unit builds, so even for infantry, even for spear, even for bow, these three together in this specific ordering, in my opinion. So Senelle's 8-second skill damage buff follows through into Daenerys, and you can actually buff her when she gets her active caster off, is the best combination in this game mode, and they will belong probably alone in S tier for mono cav players. Now, a lot of these I'm going to be repeating myself from the previous tier list, so Annie will go into C, Arya will go into D, Baelish will go into A, all the same reasoning as I mentioned in the infantry tier list. Arya has middling stats, bad stats realistically, and a meh active. Annie has middling stats but a good active, but because she's lacking the passive stats, her active really has to be great to push her into the higher tiers, and you're really going to want her as chief commander to make use of her active, and I don't think it's just quite good enough. It's good, but it's not incredible. Cersei for infantry I put into C. You could argue she should go into B for cavalry because there's a little bit fewer alternatives than there is for infantry. I'll keep her in C though, just because of how short her buff is. 4 seconds is just so short. The skill damage increase is irrelevant because of that, so it's just 50% normal attack and counterattack damage increase, plus the CC removal. It's just fairly meh, in my opinion. If you have her, I'm sure you'll run her in somewhere in your lineups. But as far as a tier list goes, when you think about it objectively, I just don't think she's that great at all. Enzo, A tier, great passive stats with the 180% all cav, good solid active, good solid damage, good solid defense buff. Nothing fancy. For mid-tier cav builds, you will probably want him in the march with Leila, because as far as damage scaling goes, this is pretty much the best you're going to get. It's like him and then Julien. You're not really going to be using anything better than that in terms of direct damage coefficient at the mid-tier. You're going to need stuff like Sandor and Daenerys to actually scale above this. So for mid-tier, He really has a role there. Your Lord March will probably want to be Salma, Enzo, Leila, I'd say. On that same note, I'll just play Salma. Like, she's amazing. She's the best active of any of the mid-tier Cav commanders. The fact that her active synergizes with itself is great. You're increasing your normal attack damage by a percentage while simultaneously increasing your attack. So those will multiply together, which is the best active you'll have for 95% of you watching, I imagine. So put her as your chief commander. She is absolutely brilliant. Jaime, as I said in my inventory one, you're not going to be getting anything out of his stats or his active ability. The only thing he will be contributing in a Cav build is this passive. To make the most out of that passive, you're going to want to have him with Baelish probably for his normal attack passive. If you have gold Baelish, I would try and run this three together. They will all synergize really well together. Baelish has the normal attack damage increase, Salma has the normal attack damage increase, Baelish has the normal attack reproc, and then Jaime will be there, giving you crits on all of them as they go off. Without gold Baelish though, you can make use of him with something like Salma and anything else that's increasing attack or normal attack damage, but he's just not that great because he's not bringing any stats at all. Jeane is one I've had a bit of a change of heart on recently. Also, I actually think she's the best free-to-play cavalry commander in Siege of Winterfell. The reason for this is her skill damage increase lasts 8 seconds, and 8 seconds is long enough, like Senelle's is, for this to actually be of relevance. Normally, these skills don't actually do anything because they just expire too soon. Jeane's, you will be able to get the use out of that. So if you queue her before something like an Enzo ability, you will actually get quite good value out of her. She isn't great. Her stats are average. You're not going to want to be running her in whale builds or anything. She's sort of just a budget Senelle. For that reason too, if you just have gold Dany, you could argue running this free and this ordering for the same logic as running Senelle in that spot could be the best thing you could do. I'm not sure if it would be that in practice, but honestly, if you think through the maths, and this truly is a flat percentage multiplier, if you get that on a Dany active, this would theoretically be 3,600% scaling in terms of damage, which is vastly beyond anything else that you're going to be picking. I don't know if it practically does end up that way, but mathematically, that trio is actually amazing. So I'd think about that at the very least in terms of running that. Jon, boring ability, but decent value, makes you very tanky, do a lot of counterattack damage, just a lot of raw value tied up into him, slightly better than Cersei in my opinion. Julien, as I said in my imp video, had an awakening on him. If his debuff is applied and able to be used by everyone else in your alliance who's normal attacking the same target, that skyrockets his value. For mid-spender players particularly, he may well have a really good role in that third lineup as the chief commander. Even if just thinking it through selfishly, let alone buffing your alliance members, if you have your Lord March being Salma with Lord stats as your chief commander, and you're getting that 90% normal attack increase, you're getting that 1,800% cav attack, and you're really buffing your normal attacks on this march. If you then buff those attacks even further by debuffing your target that you're grouped up and attacking with all 3 marches with Julien, that's really, really good. And you can sort of indirectly think of it as buffing the damage of your other 2 marches, not just your own with Julien's. Kevin, I think, is meh. He has a niche role for keeping healer third lineups alive. I don't really like him. If your options are running low on that third lineup as a mid-spender player, you can debatably run him, but he does have to be one of the lower priority picks in my opinion. Laena, very, very good as a passive stat provider. Her active is very meh. Find her. So if you're running mono cav and you're hitting a spear lineup, you're going to want to change target as soon as possible. So I'm going to ignore the second part of that active. And she's basically, in that case, just a Merrel with 60% more passive stats, which admittedly is pretty good, but the active is just pretty meh. And on that same note, as I am talking about him, I will put Merrel just below her, right there. Margaery has the second highest scaling active in the game mode. She doesn't give you any cav stats, so she can't go in one of the higher tiers. But as the chief commander of your second or third lineup, she's honestly not bad at all. Gold Margaery active is just so good. Mengo, as I stated in my video, you're going to have to tech him into your formations somewhere if you're facing an alliance that's excessively package running with Mengo Cav. Since this is a Cav video itself, you can also talk about the fact that you can run packages with Mengo Cav. This is going to be the meta with how you want to run packages in Siege of Winterfell. You want to have dedicated people with Cav Lord March, Cav Refinement, Mengo in their Lord March, and they're going to want to pick up the package and run it as fast as possible back to your side of the map. And it's honestly just an absolute nightmare to deal with if you can consistently get the package in the hands of someone who's actually doing that, because it's so fast with the new march speeds. Night King, very good. 15 seconds total at gold of total normal attack, counter attack, and skill nullification. The normal attack removing for 3 seconds alone, you could envision as 1,500% damage coefficient, because it's a swing effect where you're removing that from being dealt upon your own alliance from normal attacks. So Night King, I think, is one of the very best actives. Raymond, Sabrina, Tyrion, really meh. Sinara, you can't synergize with anything. With Jaime and Leila in off builds, you can synergize with other stuff. So Jaime you can put with stuff like Salma, even in more mid-spender builds. Leila too, you can put with something like Lats that has decent damage attached to it. You can put it with something like Margaery or something like Sansa. Sinara, though, the only thing she synergizes with is Daeron, and Daeron only works with infantry. He only gives infantry buffs, so she has to be bottom tier. I put her in this video, or in this tier list, that just the uniformity of me putting Jaime and Leila in all the other off builds, so I thought might as well put Sinara here also. I mentioned Sansa there. Sansa in free-to-play formations particularly will really have a role as chief commander in the second or third lineup because of her 2,150 coefficient heal, third highest coefficient active in the game mode. Seg, Soren, about 700% coefficient actives. Soren's 650% as a heal. Seg is 700% as damage. They have middling stats, but alright actives. They can be alright picks in a third lineup, but really not high priority at all. Winton, I think, is probably the best pick of all of the C tier. You could probably argue Cersei's better than him, actually, but in terms of the realistic commanders for most people, his active ability is just the best. So it's same as Lario's from the infantry video, except Winton is awakened. So the 350 damage coefficient and 900% attack, plus the 120% cav attack, or cav stats generally. If you can have the awakening army size on him, he is a very solid pick in my opinion, even for mid-spender builds. I actually quite like Winton as a pick. He has no weaknesses whatsoever, good stats, good active, definitely has a place in mono cav builds. Sandor is one of the best abilities in the game mode. Very good damage reduction, 1,350% damage coefficient at gold, and 50% flat damage reduction from all sources, with 120% total stats. That is great, puts him above everything in these tiers below, in my opinion, for sure. Rob, I would put in C tier. I think his active is just not quite good enough. He's the Chris equivalent of Cav. Good stats, and he'll mostly just be there as a second, third commander in a lineup to buff up the stats a bit. And then Russell, if we can find him, he's kind of unique in that he applies a debuff for skill damage taken. So even though it only lasts 5 seconds, you can make use of this because you can have your teammates hit into the target with actives. So he'll be very situational in terms of how he actually plays out in practice. Because if you're not having any actives cast into that debuff, he's going to be very middling. If you have a Daenerys active or 2 cast into this debuff, he'll skyrocket in the tiers realistically. So if you're a lower spending player surrounded by a lot of high spending players with stuff like Daenerys, I would consider Russell a lot higher than I'm listing him here. For general use, I'll put him at the higher end of C and probably leave it about there. So the overall takeaways is this top 3 is the best trio in the game mode. If you're a mid spender, I'd run your Lord March as Salma, Enzo, Leila. If you're running Jeane, you want her queued directly behind a high fraught per active. It only lists damage, but I would assume it affects heals too. I'm not sure about that, and there's not really any way to tell, but I would be very surprised if it didn't affect Sansa and Margaery also. I guess we're never going to know unless they show reports, but if you have it, say, third in the sequencing, and then have it Julien be the chief commander, so something like this, in terms of a free, where Julien will cast his active, you'll have your main march, with Salma buffing normal attacks, hitting into the march that Julien's debuffed. Laena is providing the passive stats, building that march up a bit. Then Jeane casts her buff right in time to go back to Julien, to then have bonus damage on his active. If you're package running, make sure you've got Mengo in your Lord March. If you don't have Senelle, but you've got Gold Dany, think about running this free, with Jeane as a substitute for Senelle. If you're free to play, look to run Sansa in your third lineup as chief commander potentially. Yeah, I think that is pretty much it for Mono Cav.